The relationship between Iran and Azerbaijan has gained a lot of attention as of late. Though strained at times, there are many nuances to this relationship. To discuss this, I'm joined by Eldar Mamedov, a foreign policy advisor for the Socialists and Democrats group in the European Parliament, who will be speaking on his own behalf today. So, Mr. Mamedov, thank you very much for your time.
My pleasure.
Months ago, tensions were rising between Iran and Azerbaijan, and it was in many headlines. Military exercises took place on the new borderline between the two countries, which has grown in length since the end of the 2020 Karabakh war. There were also saber-rattling statements coming out of both sides. Since then, some believe that tensions have abated, others believe that there has been further tensions and developments. What do you think about this news about the Iran-Azerbaijan tensions at the moment? Have they abated, or is it more complex?
Well, I would definitely say that those tensions have always been present, and at certain moments they burst into surface, and now we are living through a period when both sides feel, I would say, quite uneasy about each other, to put it mildly. We see again there is a outburst of info war between the two parties. There are again a number of articles which were published in pro-government Azerbaijani websites, which are widely seen as being sort of the voice of the government, and those articles they openly call for a secession of what they call in Baku the southern Azerbaijan from Iran. This is a rather new phenomenon. So far, such calls in such a clear and unambiguous manner for the so-called southern Azerbaijanis to secede from Iran were not issued in pro-government media in Azerbaijan. So that's a new element. There is also pushback from the Iranian side. There are more articles in the Iranian media which critically question the status of relationship between Iran and Azerbaijan, and who see Azerbaijan, the Republic of Azerbaijan, as basically a hostile and at least unfriendly regime to Iran. So the tensions are definitely there, and the main reason for those tensions is that some structural questions in relations between Azerbaijan and Iran have been festering since 1991, when independent Republic of Azerbaijan has emerged as a result of the breakup of the Soviet Union, and those questions have never been addressed and resolved. And now, obviously, with the geopolitical changes in the South Caucasus, again, these tensions they burst to the surface and become sharpened.
Mm. And how would you say Azerbaijan's ruling elite and population view Iranian society and the Iranian regime, and vice versa? How does the Iranian regime and population view Azerbaijan's government class and its population society?
Well, in the case of Azerbaijan, it's really difficult to assess with any degree of accuracy, because such things as independent sociological surveys are obviously not available in Azerbaijan, so we have to base our assessments on anecdotal evidence, on our own empirical impressions. So based on that, I could say that the attitude of Azerbaijani elite towards Iran is definitely negative. Iran is seen as a country that has sided with Armenia during the first Karabakh war, and in the subsequent years when Armenian forces were in control of Azerbaijani territories. So that is one very powerful element that shapes the attitude towards Iran. But also there's a broader consideration which sees Iran as essentially a backward country, a country which represents Azerbaijan's past, religious, Shiite, traditional, more than what Azerbaijani elite would like to see as the country's future, which is one of they would call it modern secular state and society and so on. That's the self-perception. And of course, the third element is also strongly impacted by the influence of Turkic nationalist ideology, which holds that 30 million or so Azerbaijanis, ethnic Azerbaijanis in Iran, are subject to oppression from the so-called Persian state. So these are the perceptions that shape the attitude of a big part, if not the majority, of Azerbaijani population. But then there is also another part which these days perhaps is much smaller, but it still exists. Those are the traditional Shiite believers, especially in villages around Baku and in the south of the country, in towns like Lenkaran or Astara. Those are Shiite believers who do not share maybe this visceral dislike of Iran, because many of them go to Iran for medical treatment. It's much more affordable for people with modest means than in the Republic of Azerbaijan. Then there's also the element of religious tourism to holy Shiite sites in Iran, like in Qom or Mashhad. So the attitudes of those people, they may not be actively hostile to Iran because of that element, but that, of course, also does not mean necessarily that they align with the policies and the government of the Islamic Republic of Iran. But I would say that these days the predominant attitude in the society and also in the media that you can observe is one of rather negative view of Iran. When it comes to Iran, there is a broader view of South Caucasus as an area that belongs to, let's say, broader realm of Iranian civilization, as they refer to it, because this part of the world was part of the Persian Empire. So I would not say there is active nostalgia in the political sphere, because that's a rather ancient history. It's more than 200 years ago. And of course, there are no serious calls or attempts to reintegrate South Caucasian states into Iran. If at all such ideas are entertained, they may be found more on the margins of intellectual discourse, but they're definitely not part of the mainstream political orientation in Iran. Now, that said, of course, the Republic of Azerbaijan, because of its nationalist orientation and because of its close ties with some of Iran's adversaries, of course, is seen also with great reservations, I would say, in Iranian political and intellectual mainstream.
And do you think Iran's perception of Azerbaijan or vice versa has changed particularly since the 2020 Karabakh war? And leading on from that, Iran's leadership and other officials have made statements in the past about how it will not accept any changes to its border with its neighbors, including Armenia. Some see this as a reference to Armenia's southern Sunnic region and how both Armenia and Azerbaijan have agreed to open up regional transport links and communications. What do you think about Iran's relationship with Azerbaijan regarding this? What did you think about these statements about borders and transport links?
Well, if you ask me whether the war, the Second Karabakh War, whether it affected the perceptions, I would say definitely yes. Maybe it did not create new perceptions, but it definitely sharpened up all those structural issues that I referred to that were not resolved during 30 years since the breakup of the Soviet Union. Now, of course, Iran is worried that Azerbaijan has now become much more powerful as a result of the war. They definitely worry that Turkey is penetrating in the region and exerting more influence than ever before through Azerbaijan. And of course, Iranians are also quite restless about Azerbaijan's close relations with Israel. And given the context of Iran-Israel Cold War, of course, Iranian officials cannot be indifferent to the fact that Azerbaijan's alliance with Israel has been deepened as a result of that war. Now, when it comes to the statements on inviolability of the borders, what is absolute red line for Iran is losing their access to the border with Armenia. And that has been stated many times at different levels. And recently, the Supreme Leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, repeated that at the summit with presidents of Russia and Turkey, Putin and Erdogan. He said again that this is a red line for Iran. They will not tolerate losing the border with Armenia. Another evidence of the fact that they're taking it seriously is that they appointed recently a consul in the city of Kapan in the region. Now, the question is why Iranians take it so seriously. I think the answer is that the rhetoric that we hear from Baku is not just about opening of communications. It's only part of it. There is also constant talk about Zangezur being a historical part of Azerbaijan that has been repeated several times at the highest level by the president of Azerbaijan. In his speeches, he often makes references to Zangezur, and he's talking about returning to the lands of our ancestors. The idea that Yerevan, the capital of Armenia, is also part of ancestral Azeri lands is also quite popular, being propagated at the level of official discourse. And obviously, for Iranians, just like for Armenians, the questions arise. Is this so-called Zangezur corridor, is this only about unblocking communications, or is it about seizing part of Armenian land and connecting Republic of Azerbaijan, the mainland Republic of Azerbaijan, with the Nakhchivan exclave? If that is the case, then of course it completely changes the picture. First of all, of course, for Armenia, because it's part of Armenian sovereign territory, but also for Iran, because in that case, Iran would lose its border with Armenia and will face one uninterrupted Turkish-Azerbaijani presence on its northern borders.
And finally, Mr. Mamedov, what are you looking out for? Where do you think this relationship is going? How do you see the next stage of Iran-Azerbaijan relations looking like?
I think it's going to be quite tense because of those underlying issues. The direct call for secession of so-called South Azerbaijan from Iran is a qualitatively new, let's say, level of hostile rhetoric. And we always have to bear in mind that those websites, they do not act on their own, and they do not contradict ever the official line. So on the official level, such demands and such positions have not been voiced. But we can safely assume that without at least implicit green light from the very top, this sort of calls would not have been issued. On the other hand, the effect of it is that on the Iranian side, the attitudes are also being hardened. And what people in Baku underestimate those who issue such calls is that the Azerbaijani community in Iran is deeply integrated into the society. They are the society. The supreme leader of Iran is of Azeri origin. And there are countless members of Iranian elite in all spheres, political, religious, military, economic, which are of Azerbaijani origin. So what this kind of expansive expansionist rhetoric from Baku leads to is to the pushback on the level of Iranian society, including Iranian Azerbaijanis who see themselves historically as part of Iran, and moreover, they believe that Iran as a state belongs to them, exactly to that extent that it belongs to Persians and others. So this kind of simplistic rhetoric that if there are, they claim there are 30 million Azerbaijanis, that they all put their ethnic identity above their state and national attachment to Iran. This is a very short-sighted, very simplistic perception. It can definitely lead to difficulties and problems in the relationship between these two countries. On the other hand, of course, there are economic interests which historically have mitigated those tensions, and possibly they will keep mitigating them in the future. There's this oil and gas swap deal, trilateral deal between Azerbaijan, Turkmenistan, and Iran. If the JCPOA, the nuclear agreement, is concluded, hopefully, that could also lead to more economic trade exchanges between Azerbaijan and Iran. So that part will probably mitigate the tensions and not let them burst out in the open hostilities. But the underlying tensions which stem from those structural issues that have not been resolved and moreover have been exacerbated in the past years, that tension will probably stay there and maybe even get worse.
Okay, well, Mr. Mamedov, thank you very much for your time.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.
And thank you for joining us on CivilNet.